These are sanding sticks. They're an easy-to-make tool that makes the tedious and time-consuming process of sanding a lot more efficient. I've mentioned them in several other videos on this channel, but it recently occurred to me that not everyone knows about these. So, in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about them and show you how to make some for yourself. But before that, I'd like to quickly thank Rio Grande for sponsoring this video. Rio Grande is one of the largest jewelry supply retailers here in the US, and you can check them out online at riogrande.com. Item numbers for relevant products will be shown in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, as well as being linked in the description. So, what exactly are sanding sticks? Well, simply put, they are sheets of sandpaper wrapped around some kind of flat, rigid material. This gives the sandpaper the ergonomics of a hand file, which allows you to achieve a lot more leverage and control when sanding your work. This also has the effect of speeding up the sanding process significantly, and it's a lot easier on your wrists than other methods of sanding. Sanding sticks are particularly good for jobs where you need to sand something with a flat, even plane, or when you need to get into tight corners. They're also great for beveling edges, as well as niche applications such as creating pin stems for brooches. Commercial versions of these do exist, of course, however, for reasons that will become clear throughout the course of this video, it's a lot more cost-effective to make them yourself. So, let's do just that. The first thing you're going to need is a rigid material to wrap the sandpaper around. Traditionally, this has been a square or rectangular piece of wood, with pieces of lath or slats being a popular choice. The one I have here is a 1/4 inch thick by 1.25 inches wide, and it's been cut to a length of about 1 foot. I'm not sure how wood is sold elsewhere in the world, but I'll leave the metric dimensions on screen for those of you who don't use freedom units. Anyway, these were my go-to for almost a decade. However, in recent years, I have switched over to bars of aluminum with the same dimensions. Aluminum sits in that sweet spot where it's a harder and more rigid material than many woods, but unlike other metals such as steel, aluminum is soft enough that it won't mar or dent whatever soft, non-ferrous metal I'm working with should I accidentally slip and hit the metal with the sanding stick. But the main reason I like aluminum is that it's impervious to warping or rusting if you wet sand with it. But these are just a few examples. There are countless other things you can use to make these. For example, many old school jewelers I've met prefer to use a 3/4 to 1 inch wide square hardwood dowel that's been cut to around 6 inches or so. A flute manufacturing company I used to work for would actually take old worn out number 6 hand files and then wrap them with sandpaper. I've personally cut up yardsticks in the past, and I've also made a set of stubby ones out of this 16 gauge sheet of plate steel. And those are for very specific applications, but yeah. Paint sticks are another popular choice, though I don't know if I'd recommend them unless you can get the ones that are thicker than the freebies that many paint stores carry. Either way, regardless of what you use, the next thing you're going to need is some sandpaper. I won't get into the minutia of silicon carbide versus aluminum oxide versus whatever, because then we'd be here all day. Instead, I'll just say that I recommend looking for sandpaper that can be used wet or dry, such as 3M's creatively named Wet or Dry Sandpaper or Norton's Black Ice line of sandpaper. A good rule of thumb is to seek out the kind of sandpaper that's marketed toward the auto body industry. Now, at this point, you may be tempted to just take the sandpaper and wrap it around the chosen stick material, but what you're going to end up with is this puffy sanding stick that lacks the nice crisp edges and flat surfaces of the kind that you can make if you put in a little more work. To do that, you'll need to get something that you can score the sandpaper with. I use this old piece of drill rod steel, personally, but you could use a cheap scribe that you don't mind ruining, or even an awl from a hardware store. Really, any kind of sharpened steel rod is good here. That said, I don't recommend that you use a knife, for reasons that I'll explain in just a bit. Now, you'll most likely need to dress the tip of your chosen tool, as it may be too blunt or too sharp in its current state. Simply angle the steel rod and rotate it as you rub it back and forth against some coarse sandpaper, such as this piece of 220 grit. Don't worry about making the tip look pretty or symmetrical, it doesn't matter, and it's going to get ruined later anyway. What does matter is making sure that tip isn't too sharp. So you're going to want to run the tip over the sandpaper a few times while rotating it between your fingers like so. The goal here is to create a bullet-shaped tip, similar to that of a ballpoint pen. This is important because we're going to use this tool to score and bend the sandpaper, and if it's too sharp, it'll end up cutting through it instead. With this tool made, we're now going to place a piece of sandpaper with the back facing up on a flat surface that you don't mind scratching up, such as this cutting mat. Lay the stick material down over the sandpaper and try and keep the long edge of the sandpaper perpendicular to the long edge of the stick. But don't place the stick material all the way to the edge of the sandpaper. Instead, the stick material should overhang the sandpaper by just a little bit. Otherwise, you could end up with a piece of protruding sandpaper that will negatively impact things a little bit later. Now, use your scribing implement to trace the edge of the bar a couple times. Don't press too hard or else you could cut through the sandpaper rather than score it. Pull the sandpaper tight against the stick and rotate it 90 degrees so that the edge that you just scribed against is now on the bottom. Keep the sandpaper pulled tight and scribe another crease against this newly formed exposed edge. Keep repeating this process, and after the 4th crease, the edge that you'll be scribing against will be wrapped in sandpaper, so you'll need to start rotating the scribe as you rub it against the edge to score the sandpaper. This is important because it will evenly distribute the wear as the sandpaper abrades at the tip of this scribe. If you don't do this, you will create a sharp knife edge on the tip, and it will risk slicing through the sandpaper instead of creasing it. This is why I recommend using a steel rod over a knife, by the way. That said, this won't completely prevent the tip from getting messed up, and obviously coarser sandpaper will have more of an effect than finer sandpaper. So if you're making a bunch of sanding sticks, every now and again you'll have to reshape and redress the tip of your tool. Anyway, always keep the sandpaper pulled taut and repeat the scribing process until you reach the end of the sheet. Then, wrap the top and the bottom edges of the sandpaper in tape that you can easily remove, such as this painter's tape. Be aware that some of the cheaper masking tapes can leave behind this sticky residue, especially if they've been sitting there for long periods of time. Be sure to note what grit the sandpaper is somewhere on the sanding stick. With these aluminum bars, I've stamped the numbers onto them, but you could just take a permanent marker and write the grit on the tape. The really nice thing about making them this way is that you can peel off the used layers of sandpaper and expose a fresh new layer underneath. Once you use up all the sandpaper on the sanding stick, you can just take the tape off and wrap a new piece of sandpaper around it. One thing you'll notice is that the sandpaper will want to peel away easily along that edge you scored. Unlike the other method where you would just wrap the sandpaper around without scoring, it'll kind of rip off in a kind of inconsistent, unpleasant manner. This is a major benefit over the commercially available sanding sticks I mentioned earlier, as those generally are taped to the stick, and while they do sit a lot flatter than these homemade ones, once you use up the sandpaper on that surface, that's it, it's gone, it's done. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I cannot imagine my workflow without making these, and hopefully you'll find them as useful as I do. Stay tuned for more content like this, and I hope to see you all next time.